Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another Bake Along episode with me. I'm Anna Olson, your host, and I love to share tested, reliable, delicious recipes with you. And today we're getting festive. It's time for another holiday cookie, my Icebox Meltaway cookies. These Icebox Meltaway cookies are divine. They are a classic shortbread. And if you like the kind of shortbread that you snap into and then the shortbread just melts away into nothingness, this is your cookie recipe. And it's an easy make-ahead recipe too, so you can make it now and freeze it for the holiday season. I've already got my butter in a bowl, and you know, if you're making a shortbread recipe, it all starts with the butter. You can, of course, do this recipe in a mixer or with beaters if you wish, but I'd like to show you that yes, you can do it by hand. And this way, if you're baking along with me, you can see what every single step looks like. So I'm just smoothing out the butter now so that once I add my icing sugar, it's a little easier to combine. And I'm just gonna get that mixing a little bit before I add my lemon zest. So just slowly, because of course, without fail, you go too fast and it looks like you walked into a blizzard. You get icing sugar everywhere. And the same goes if you're using a mixer, start on low speed and then speed it up. But as the icing sugar dissolves, it helps soften up the butter a little bit. There we go. Now I'm about ready to add the lemon zest. So even though the butter and sugar aren't fully blended, I want to give the lemon zest an opportunity for its flavor to work through the dough evenly, so you don't get those surprise bits of bitter lemon. And now the lemon is a personal addition. You can leave the lemon out and rely on the vanilla extract that I'm shortly going to add, or you could add a different citrus zest if you wanted. But the lemon with the fruit I'm choosing to add to these Icebox Meltaways, because this cookie recipe has the addition of your choice of fruit and nuts. But before I get to that, I have to cream my butter and sugar together. Now, using icing sugar as opposed to granulated sugar makes a big difference in the texture of your shortbread. A traditional Scottish style shortbread, or the crispier style of shortbread, usually has a granulated, a turbinado, or a brown sugar. But when you're using icing sugar, because it's so finely ground, you tend to get that slightly more dense, but more delicate shortbread. So if you like the softer style, this is the recipe for you. Of course, I have both styles right here on the channel for you to take your pick. Okay, now that I've got these two ingredients together, the only liquid added to this recipe, my bit of vanilla extract. So for a shortbread to be a shortbread, it has to be A, butter rich, it can't contain egg, and nor can it contain baking powder or baking soda. So you're really relying on its density, but yet tenderness at the same time to deliver that shortbread texture. All right, now it's time for the dry ingredients, which you can sift together in a separate bowl, or you can sift them right over your mixing bowl. I've got my all-purpose flour and my salt. I mean, you know, if you've been watching my recipes for years, that I like to bake with unsalted butter because I like for us to be in charge of the salt. Recipe to recipe, your salt needs vary. Brand to brand, and your butter quantities vary. So how much salt do you know you're adding unless you do it yourself? Now, the last ingredient is key to this recipe, and I'm just gonna set this over my bowl just so you can see. This is potato starch, and I find when it comes to a melt-away, the most meltingly melt-away cookie, potato starch is key. Cornstarch just doesn't deliver the right texture, and I just love, have you ever pinched potato starch between your fingers? It has a squeakiness to it. I feel like you could hear it, but you can't. But it's so silky and soft. You can find it usually in the natural food section of your grocery store, or often different types of European delis will carry it. That's where I buy mine. So it sifts in easily, but quite frankly, what the starch does is, other than kick up a lot of dust, is add tenderness to that cookie dough, and it just contributes to that melting consistency when you take a bite. So again, if you're mixing this in a mixer on low speed, but just combine it slowly. You might even have to get in there with your hands a little bit if you're doing this by hand. But I know you're not afraid of that. We're bakers, we love getting a little bit messy. And now this is, while you're stirring your dough together, you want to think about what type of fruit or nut or combination you'd like to add. Because I will be honest, this cookie recipe is inspired by my grandmother's favorite cookie recipe that she would make every holiday season. And it was an icebox style like this, cut into coins, and she would always put candied cherries and walnuts in them. And so it wasn't Christmas in my house when I was a kid unless those cookies were out on the table. But now there's so many other options to consider. So know what your family likes and what you have on hand and wish to add. So it could be dried cherries, it could be raisins, it could be chopped dried apricots, pecans, walnuts. You don't need to add nuts at all. In fact, what I'm adding today are dried blueberries. I would love to just finish bringing this dough together with my hands. If you're doing this in a mixer, you won't have to do this step. You just keep mixing until it comes together. But if you've ever watched any of my scone videos, this is also how I finish mixing my scones. I'm just bringing the dough together, and that is my potato starch bowl making a little racket. But you can see how quickly the dough does come together. And now is a great time for me to add my dried blueberries. So it is the holiday season, so I'm getting a little bit fancy. But I love how dried blueberries have that concentrated flavor. So when you have a tiny cookie, like one of these Icebox Meltaways, you want a big hit of flavor in a small little bite. There we go, the dough has almost come together. I rely on my bowl and bench scraper to keep things in hand. There we go, and now it's time to divide and shape the dough. So once you've got your signature ingredient, your fruit or nut added, and I have provided a full list of suggestions below in case you're stuck. Now it's time to shape them because we have to chill them before we slice them. This is too warm to slice right now. Now my dough is a little soft. I'm gonna just grab a bit of my rolling flour just to make it easier to shape into a disc, into a roll, about 1.5 inches across. And you can tell by how firm the dough is that once it sets up, it's nice and firm. One of my frustrations is when you make an icebox cookie, and if the dough itself stays so soft when you slice into it, you get a flat side to your cookie. So you go through all this work to shape it into a round. and then it loses that round character. What you can do, actually, my good friend Lisa does this all the time. She'll take her rolls of cookies and put them inside an empty paper towel tube. And that way, even chilling in the fridge, they won't get dented, dinged, or get a flat side to them. They stay nice and round. I think that's a great tip. If you've got any holiday cookie tips like that, I'd love to see them below, because you know, we're a baking community. We like to share. That's the whole reason I'm here, is to share recipes that I want you to make and feel good about when you share them with your friends and family over the holiday season. So this is a great make-ahead point. If you want to make these cookies now and pop them in the freezer, just wrap them well. And then you can just write on what they are, slice a 1/4 inch thick, bake for 10 to 12 minutes at 375, and then you know you have these on hand, because this little package takes up a lot less room in the freezer than a whole batch of baked cookies. But if you want to bake them right away, you pop them in the fridge, chill them for about 2 hours to really set up that butter, and then it's time to slice and bake. So I've got my baking tray ready, my chilled dough. So I just pulled these out right before I started talking to you, and they are ready to slice. So as I mentioned, just a 1/4 inch thick, with a good sharp knife. Do remember, actually, this is a great tip. If you're adding something like walnuts or pecans, it's a good idea to cut them a little bit, because these are delicate cookies, and if you have a big piece of walnut, it might interfere and you'll find part of the cookie dough falls off on one side. So keep your pieces small. Even dried cherries or candied cherries, cut them up a little bit. But you can see this dough sets well. It doesn't get a flat side to it. It stays nice and round. And like all good shortbread, they don't change their shape when they bake. This is not the style of shortbread you would roll and cut shapes for decorating. It's too dense in terms of a raw dough for that, and too delicate once it bakes, which is why I make them and cut them into such small rounds. Any bigger, and they're not fragile, but they do become easier to break or crack in half if you're packing them in a cookie tin. So you want to leave about 1 inch between the cookies. But you don't have to worry about leaving more than that, because the cookies won't change their shape when they bake. There we go. And I even bake off the end piece, because that's the chef's privilege piece. These are mine to eat, so keep those at the very end. Now, I'll pop this into my 375 oven, and they take no time to bake, 10 to 12 minutes. And then I actually look at the bottom of the cookie, and I'll show you with my baked ones. They shouldn't brown on top at all, but you'll just get the slightest hint of browning on the very bottom. So in these go, and then I'll just bring my trays right over top. Here they are out of the oven, and as I mentioned, you get just the lightest bit of browning, so you know they're cooked through, but no visible browning on the top or the sides. Now, if you need to, I get often asked about where you bake in your oven and rotating your pans. It really does depend on your oven. So the more you bake, the more you get to know your oven. You may find that you have to rotate the trays 180 degrees because the back of the oven is hotter than the front. I do find with delicate shortbread cookies, the middle of the oven is best. A lot of heating elements are at the bottom, so you get too much browning on the bottom. Or if you're really nervous about it, you can bake it on the upper third of your oven. But then they're ready to go. And one of the great things about shortbreads, especially over the holiday season, is they keep well. And in fact, they improve when they sit in the cookie tin. So these stay fresh for days. They also freeze well. So I've given you options. You can freeze the unbaked dough. The cookies themselves freeze well. Plus they'll keep well and store in a tin. And a plate of these for the holiday season, well, aren't you in for a treat? And these really are a treat. They earn their name Meltaway for a good reason. That's it. You get that snap, and then they melt away into buttery goodness. And then all you're left with is the blueberry, the hint of lemon, and you're ready to have another 1 or 6. So if you're baking for Santa, get an extra large glass of milk. He's going to want it. Your family is going to love this recipe. And now you have some great tips on how to personalize a good, reliable shortbread recipe. I've had a great time sharing this with you, and I have so many more holiday recipes coming your way, so you must subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single delicious bite. I'll see you again soon.